Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video. This is a recent reads video. 2 books completed this week. The first is Old Rendering Plant by Wolfgang Hilbig, translated by Isabel Fargo Cole. And the other is a debut novel by British author John Ransom called The Whale Tattoo. So I'll start with Old Rendering Plant, which I saw Travel Through Stories talk about, and this book is the most in my wheelhouse that it could possibly be, other than, my penchant for experimental writing. But in terms of descriptive writing, this hits absolutely every one of the buttons that it's possible to hit in me, because I love reading about the poetics of ruin, and that's what this book is. It's set in Eastern Germany. So it's about a boy who doesn't like being inside his house with his parents, sort of feels completely alienated from them, and goes for long treks outside of the house through the local landscape, which is a mixture of sort of wild forest, but also a former industrial landscape, and the two have it's sort of the merger of the two, whereby, much like sort of Mesoamerican ziggurats that have been discovered buried in jungles, or the original discovery of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, which again had been reclaimed by the jungle. The industrial bits here have been overgrown and reclaimed by nature, but little sort of foundation stones and things still exists. And he loves playing in an old abandoned mill. But the industrial part has also wreaked its impact on nature, in that the river has been sort of toxified and sort of changed colour, and the trees have sort of grown mad with the mixture of dead material matter, which has privileged some trees over others, that have been caused by the deindustrialization. So that's the framework of the book. And one of its themes is vanishing. Obviously, the industrial landscape has vanished. People have vanished in some of the deep sort of mining wells, or whatever they're called, pits, and never been sort of found. And the boy has this overpowering sense of he's vanishing from home, in that his parents don't, increasingly sort of don't miss his absences, and almost don't care. When he used to go back for set piece meals, and even that has stopped now. But what I could really relate to is, I'm an only child, and again, when I was growing up in the 70s, we didn't have quite the background noise in cities that we do now, sort of constant traffic and stuff. So actually the dead of night was really silent, and I could hear from across from some railway marshalling yards, which are probably 2-3 miles away, all the tannoy announcements as the railway men were moving all these trucks of material and stuff they were hauling. And I found these very unworldly and alien, and my rampant imagination at age 8 to 10, whatever, was that these were literally sort of alien invasions or military manoeuvres, that were going to destabilize the government, and in my bed I would imagine hiding places in my house. It's very much a sort of mentality of an only child, and I felt I got that vibe very much from this isolated kid. I don't know if the kid is an only child in the book or not, but I could really identify with that, and the sort of fear and anxiety. So he goes on these walks, both loving the freedom of it, loving what he finds, but also very trepidatious, very anxious that they could swallow him up whole. He could vanish and disappear at any moment, and those two sort of contradictory forces are very much at play. And I thought that was, as I say, very powerful to me personally. But there are deeper lying themes other than this descriptive stuff, because a former coal plant under East Germany was basically bombed to hell in the war, and under East German communism was sort of recycled, as it were, and became an abattoir and rendering plant. And the boy describes seeing sort of cattle trucks bringing in the live cattle and also already dead cattle, into this, and you get the echoes of, well, pre-East Germany, under Nazi Germany, there were cattle trucks also with meat and carcasses brought for rendering, but they were human, and then they were Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and all this sort of stuff. Very chilling, very, very subtly done. So there's a lot going on here. It's only 105 pages. It packs a lot in. And I'm just going to finish up by saying 5 stars. I'm going to read a couple of passages just to give you an idea of why this, just absolutely bullseye for me. And over the moments of these stars' lights was the rushing void of space, the rushing void of time, while far away in the brown smoulder of the eastern horizon, dead poplars reared up, plaintive verticals whose unalleviated prominence menacingly abjured the fading night, like crucifixes whose arms had been hacked from their trunks. And I saw that I stood before the concrete hulk of a railway platform, part of a former loading station attached to a defunct coal factory, of which only fragments still stood, and in whose yards, the roofless halls, the vegetation had long since seized control. The vegetation was typical for the area, thriving on leached out slag and crumbling scrap metal. Neither useful nor beautiful, it seemed to have sprung up only to cover the wounds of the terrain, or only, I subjected it to continuous scrutiny, to invade my dreams with the gloomy union of its grey webs and the fog. Nightmares that recurred in reality, nightmares in which the matted layer of vegetation concealed a core of indefinable glow, as though in some building deeper in the ruins, where the workers' quarters must have been, a light was still intact. Wonderful stuff. And to the point where I've already sort of ordered a couple more books by Wolfgang Hilbig, who's not an author I'd heard of. And one of them's called Females, which is a rather unpromising title, but actually I think it's going to potentially cover a subject I've always thought about but never really sort of uncovered information, proof, whatever about, where, in the Soviet bloc, I was always intrigued by the status that sex had. And I don't mean sort of, sex with prostitutes and stuff. I mean sex within relationships. It seemed very cursory, desultory, because marriage as an institution had been sort of, gutted to some extent, even though the communists didn't, they weren't against marriage, but somehow without the religious underpinning and the whole ceremony, which obviously wasn't part of any kind of communist country. I think that put a different stamp on relationship. Not that I'm religious or believe in, uniting of souls or, all this sort of stuff. But I was always curious. I always had the sense that sex in the Eastern Bloc was slightly different to sex over in the Western. Of course, sex here is commodified both in advertising and actual transactions, and I'm talking about obviously the pre-internet era. So I've always had this notion that sex was very desultory and cursory, and not even necessarily a means of pushing away the sordid reality of life under the sort of Soviet bloc. And I got the sense from reading the blurb of this book, Females, that it could very much sort of touch with that. So I'm really looking forward to digging into that. It won't, I haven't got it yet. I won't leap to it immediately, but it might be an April read for me. And I have ordered another one called Interim, which I think has just been translated into English and is coming out this year. I could have got that wrong, but that was again the impression I got. Okay, on to John Ransom, The Whale Tattoo, which I saw Eric Carl Anderson Hall, and in some ways this is quite an impressive book debut. So the character John, has a slight mark on his cheek, which people take to be in the shape of a whale. That is not mentioned until quite late in the book. And he had left his Eastern Counties fishing town because things just sort of got on top of him. But he's now returned 2 years later. And he is under the impression, because when water of rivers and brooks, babble along past him, he thinks they're talking to him, taunting him. He is under the impression that a whale, a sperm whale, which washed up on the beach, dead, is basically, and obviously the link to the little mark on his cheek, has basically cursed him, and that death follows everywhere he goes, the death of loved ones and friends and things like this. So he goes back to his hometown, and we get a lot of the ghosts of why he left there in the first place, but also this sense of death and violence are trailing after him, but they're not down to some sort of supernatural, fatalistically preordained by the symbol of the whale. No, it's a reflection of the violence and the almost incestuous, it's one notch down from incestuous relationships of everyone in the town, where everybody is sleeping with everybody else and having children with other people's partners. Whereas John, the main character here, is absolutely gay. He is one of the few who's not polyamorous. And it's a book of, as I say, there is violence in it, but there's also, a lot of references to underpants, sweat. He wets the bed at night because of his nightmares. It's very grimy, it's very gritty. It's a working class community who are, up against it because of sort of, the decline of the economy there. And I wasn't sure about the moral message of the book, because yes, it's where he's from and the community he's from that underpin all the problems of violence and relationships and jealousies and all this sort of stuff. But as the only gay character, he seemed to, there's almost a sense of guilt and sin, and that he was being punished by this notion of the whale and death trailing after him for his sexuality, which I was a little uncomfortable with. Maybe it's less that and more about his shame and the difficulty of his situation. I mean, one of the things in this book that's so brilliantly done, his father is still alive and has always hated him, not just because he's queer, but just seems to have hated him anyway. And whenever they interact in this book, it's the father is written in very laconic style, so chilling in his attitude towards his son. The father is dying of scoliosis and is in and out of hospital, and it's John who has to keep driving him there and picking him up, and those are most of their the site of most of their interactions. And it's just brilliantly and economically done, because the words involved are not that very many on the page, but it's wonderfully done, as I say. The other thing I think Ransom does very well is he gives you the thoughts of the character straight into what they actually say, which is not what they're thinking. And he does this really, really well, I think. So there's a lot of promise here. But the thing that really carried it off for me is there's a little section between about page 110 and 116, something like that, where it just lifts off into another level, where John is having sex with a guy who, and it went well. The other guy thinks that maybe this is the start of a relationship, but then John suddenly gets an anxiety attack that, well, this guy's going to die if he sticks around with me, and does everything he can to drive this guy away. I'm not going to spoil it how he actually achieves it in the end. Unlike a lot of the other of the book, there's no violence, or no one gets hurt except emotionally hurt, obviously. And I just thought it was, it's not something, it came out of, no, I can't say it came out of nowhere, because it comes out of the world of this book, but it's not something I'd read before. And I was really taken with it. And I just thought, yeah, there's this guy, this is his first book, this guy can really go on to deliver something immense in the future. I do hope that we don't get another, his follow-up book, his next book isn't set in this same type of community. I hope he's able to take the strengths of his writing and put it in another scenario. So I'm actually really looking forward to seeing what he comes up with next, because there's a lot to admire in here. It's a tough read, though. I mean, you've got to be, as I say, all the bodily fluids are repeatedly mentioned, that there is violence of these near incestuous communities. But, I was impressed. So I gave this 4.5 stars. And quickly onto what I'm currently reading. So this is a book called The Night by Venezuelan author Rodrigo Blanco Calderon, translated by Noel Hernandez Gonzalez and Daniel Hahn. I hope to finish this today. Again, I saw Eric haul this, and I'm not going to say anything about it other than, I'm enjoying it. And my March Mammoth, William Gaddis's J.R. So Fraser Simon and I are buddy reading this. We were going to give it 3 weeks from the start of March. We're about to check in on week 2, i.e. 2/3 of the way through, tomorrow, Monday. I have about 37 pages left to go to reach part 2, the end of our agreed part 2. And then obviously next week we hope to finish up. So with a bit of luck, I'll be able to talk about both of these next week. Okay, so that's all I have for you this week. Thanks very much. Till next time.